Hi, welcome to my channel, or welcome back, hopefully. I'm Chris, and I love books, and I love movies, I love talking about them, and I love making videos about them, and I like watching videos about them. Hopefully you do too, and that is exactly why you're here. Today, I just want to do a quick selection of books that I own that I haven't quite got around to reading yet, and are technically kind of on my TBR, my to be read list, and I'm kind of making this video as a means to maybe like encourage myself to reading them. If there's anything that you see in this list that I haven't read yet that I've talked about that you really strongly recommend, please let me know in the comments and kind of give me, light a fire under me to actually give it a read, finally. As you can see, I'm kind of dressed as the dishevelled English literature teacher again, so we know that we're going to be talking about books today and books alone on the chamomile tea this morning. So without further ado, let's just get into it, shall we? The first book on my list is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I think I've had this on my shelf for quite a long while now, and this feels like one of those kind of like OG book talk recommendations or booktube recommendations that I remember seeing a lot of people talk about a couple of years ago. I think that's maybe what puts me off reading it, because I kind of have been burnt by book talk recommendations in the past. But that said, like, I have read things like Lonesome Dove and The Count of Monte Cristo, which I really did love in the last couple of years, so I probably shouldn't really colour this with the same brush as other books, really. So I think that anxiety is actually based in nothing whatsoever, and it's just all in my head, and it's all nonsense, really. For those who don't know, under the influence of their charismatic classics professor, a group of clever, eccentric misfits at an elite New England college discover a way of thinking and living that is a world away from the humdrum existence of their contemporaries. But when they go beyond the boundaries of normal morality, their lives are changed profoundly and forever. So I think people sort of throw this in with like dark academia, or it's kind of like a version of dark academia. And I'm quite a big fan of like American academia stories. Like, I love the film Dead Poets Society. I read Catcher in the Rye last year and absolutely loved it. The Holdovers is like one of my favourite films and probably my favourite Christmas film at the moment as well. They're all huge bangers, so maybe this book is actually for me. I'm a little bit worried that it might be one of those kind of like rich people bad stories that have kind of been so popular in the last couple of years, which I'm quite tired of. Like, I worry it might be like something like Saltburn, which I really did not like or enjoy. I'll never know until I find out and just read it, really. I might actually really, really love it, and it might be the right book for me. I mean, look at what I'm wearing right now. That could mean that this is the right book for me. But yeah, if I've got the complete wrong idea about this book, then let me know in the comments. And can you believe I got it for £2.50 at a charity shop? It's pretty good. Next on my to-be-read list is quite a mammoth book. It's It by Stephen King. This is another book that's been on the shelf for maybe going on 2 years, maybe 3 years. And obviously I've known about this book for a very long time. I only just recently plucked up the courage to buy it. And when I say recently, that's still like 3 years ago. I've wanted to read this book for very, very long, and I've actually put off watching any adaptations of it for that very reason, because I'd rather read the book first. But with most books that kind of sit on your TBR list, I think it's just the length that puts me off it. Like, the length of this one is over 1,000 pages. The font size and the sort of margins look quite readable, but it's maybe the kind of book you want to like save for like when you're on holiday, or maybe you want to save for kind of like spooky season. My friend just finished reading it, and I think that's kind of, given me a kick up the bum to actually finally give it a go, because he was absolutely like glowing about it. I'm quite well seasoned when it comes to Stephen King as well, so I fully expect this to have all the highs and lows of King's writing. I think one of my favourite ones by him was 11/22/63. I really like Salem's Lot. I really liked Pet Sematary. I've read Misery. I've read some of the Dark Tower series, but I kind of put this one up there with things like The Stand and Under the Dome, where they're kind of his big, mammoth, epic books that you're kind of like, well, which one do I read first? Do I read The Stand? Do I read Under the Dome? Do I read It? Which one is more worth my time? I'm not quite sure, but I think maybe when September, October time rolls around, I'll finally give it a go. So, this could be the year that I finally read It, the book. And then on the topic of Stephen King, I've also got Joe Hill's Nosferatu on my shelf, still to be read. You'll be shocked at how long it took me to understand that this book was pronounced Nosferatu. I think I was genuinely running around calling it N042R2 or something. I was getting the numbers completely wrong. And then my partner pointed out to me, like, you do realise it's pronounced Nosferatu. And I was like, okay, I probably don't deserve to read this book if I actually had no idea what it was going for. For those who don't know, the blurb is one of those kind of like strange blurbs as well. It sounds quite sprawling. Young Victoria McQueen has a gift for finding things. All she has to do is ride her bike through the Shortaway Bridge and she'll come out wherever she needs to be. It's an ability she keeps secret because no one would understand it, until she discovers she's not the only one with a special gift. Just kind of giving like The Shining maybe, you know, Danny and The Shining. Charlie Manx takes children for rides in his 1938 Rolls-Royce Wraith with its Nosferatu vanity plate, driving them, and again, I still didn't know that it meant Nosferatu even then, driving them away from their families, their homes, even their own humanity. When they reach their destination, they've changed utterly. They've become Charlie's children, as unstoppable and insane as Manx himself. Only one kid ever escaped Charlie Manx, Vic McQueen, which we saw earlier in the blurb. But the end of that nightmare was just the beginning of their life and death battle of wills, a battle that explodes a quarter century later, because now Manx has taken Vic's son and Vic McQueen is going to get him back or die trying. And honestly, that does just sound quite convoluted. Even when I'm reading it, I'm kind of like, Victoria, Charlie Manx, he becomes Charlie Manx's victim, but then takes Vic's son, and then Vic McQueen's trying to get him back, and it's a decade later, and it sounds incredibly sprawling and interesting, but it's kind of one of those ones which you like, maybe I just have to dive into and read. I think I actually bought this after Googling something like best book to start with for Joe Hill, because I just genuinely didn't know where to start and kind of wanted to give him a go. I've actually just ordered a copy of King's Sorrow as well, which I know is kind of doing the rounds on the internet at the moment. And that's another like 1,000-page book. And I did vow to myself I wouldn't read another long book after reading The Count of Monte Cristo this year, but just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on this one, because I genuinely don't know anything about Joe Hill other than that he's Stephen King's son. And I think I'm sort of struggling with Joe Hill in the same way that I did with Stephen King for years on end. Like, where do I start? What's the best entry point? Which of his books feel most like they're the kind of, you know, high watermark of their writing? And that's kind of where I feel like I'm at with this at the moment. So that's that one. And then there's two books. I've only got one of them with me. The other one's on the bookshelf back there, but I just can't be bothered to like take everything off the shelf. But there's also Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace and House of Leaves by Mark Z. Daniel. Is that his name? I think these books have been on my shelf for the longest time now. I think we're pushing like 10 years that they've been on my shelf. I've actually tried reading Infinite Jest twice now. I think there's actually still some bookmarks in there from when I tried to read it before. But I think every time I've read it, it's been at a time where I haven't actually been that into reading. It's been too much of a test of stamina to kind of really give it a go. And I think I always read up to the same point before completely giving up on it. But now that like reading is more part of my day-to-day habit, like the time could actually be nigh to give one of these books a go. And like with Infinite Jest and House of Leaves, like they're both quite infamous now for being quite typical postmodern books that men read. It's kind of become a bit of a meme for men to read these books, basically. So they've gained quite a weird reputation that's kind of maybe put me off reading them, because it's like, well, I want to read it, but then like, you know, A, this book is massive and I can't really carry it around with me. You know, I can't read this on the tube, I can't read it on the way to work, I can't, you know, carry it around. And B, it's going to be a bit of a commitment for something that's, you know, a little bit controversial now maybe. But for good or for bad, books get popular for a reason, and they get read by lots of people for a reason. And I kind of feel like I'm missing out until I really give these things a go. So might not be this year, but maybe next year when I'm thinking, okay, what's the big fat book of the year that I'm going to read? So that's kind of it for fiction. There are like loads of other books on my shelf that I'm yet to read. And there's also books that like I don't own that I really want to read, that I've kind of got my eye on buying if I ever see soon. But those guys are kind of like top of the list of like who needs to be read next. But then we also get onto the non-fiction section of the video, because I am a bit of a non-fiction nut. I feel like I haven't read one this year so far, but I do kind of go for a bit of a phase of like, oh, I'm watching a lot of Gary Stevenson on YouTube and I really want to read his book, or watched How to Change Your Mind on Netflix and now I want to read the book, or, you know, The Wager was really popular at one point and I was reading things like, you know, Lonesome Dove and The Count of Monte Cristo and these kind of big historical epics, and was watching Master and Commander and thought, I should read The Wager. So there's some books in this non-fiction list that like I probably bought because I was really interested in something at the time, and then that interest kind of passed, and now these books are just on the shelf waiting to be read and waiting for me to be back into that topic to give it a go. And first on that list is The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. I actually bought this book hot off the tails of reading Doppelganger that she wrote recently, which is kind of a book about how people kind of get invited into sort of the right wing or the alt-right sort of spectrum of the internet, following cancellations or following, big moments in their life that kind of push them further right. And it's about how she gets mistaken for somebody also called Naomi on the far right. And she just sort of like unpacks like the pipeline, basically, the pipeline to being on the alt-right. And it was very, very interesting. And I think I bought it at a time when I was really searching for answers about like what the hell's going on in society today. And I think I bought this with that same idea in mind of like, what's the kind of political, sociological and, philosophical motivations behind what's going on at the moment, or just meaning for what's going on at the moment. So this book is about the rise of disaster capitalism. Around the world, in Britain, the United States, Asia, and the Middle East, there are people with power who are cashing in on chaos, exploiting bloodshed and catastrophe to brutally remake our world in their image. They are the shock doctors. Thrilling and revelatory, the shock doctrine cracks open the secret history of our era. Secret history. Exposing these global profiteers, Naomi Klein discovered information and connections that shocked even her about how comprehensively the shock doctor's belief now dominate our world, and how this domination has been achieved. So, this was written in 2007. A lot of that blurb alone sounds quite pertinent to what's going on today. So, yeah, I think you really have to be in the mood to read something like this, really. I kind of flip-flop between trying to keep up with current affairs and trying to broaden my understanding of what's going on and, on both sides of the spectrum. But then there are times where you think it's actually maybe a little bit too much and I need to read something like, let's say I need to read something like just a nice John Steinbeck book, or I need to read like a nice fantasy novel because it's too much sometimes, But on that note of what's going on in the world and America in particular, we also have Kristen Kobes-Dumez's Jesus and John Wayne. Apologies if I've completely butchered that name as well. And this actually belongs to my partner, but I have adopted it as a book on my to-be-read list. We recently got this during our trip to Portland, Oregon last year. We went there because we're massive Twilight and Twin Peaks fans, and Portland, Oregon is extreme Pacific Northwest vibes. And I know a lot of Twilight was shot there, and we finally got to visit Powell's bookstore downtown in Portland, which is this massive used bookstore. I think it's like one of the largest in the world, or at least in America. And we spent 2 or 3 hours one morning there just basically combing the shelves. We kind of went in and we were like, don't look for anything in particular, just have a look and see what sort of jumps out at you. And, if it's something you recognise, great. If it's something that you've just seen for the first time, even better. But I think this was one that was on my partner's list, and it's sat on our shelf since October and neither of us have read it. But she bought it because she's kind of interested in organised religion and so on. So Jesus and John Wayne is a sweeping account that reveals how American evangelicals have worked for decades to replace the Jesus of the Gospels with an idol of rugged masculinity and Christian nationalism, or, in the words of one modern chaplain, with a spiritual badass. As Kristen Kobes-Dumez explains, the key to understanding this transformation is to recognize the role of culture in modern American evangelicalism. Evangelical books, films, music, clothing, and merchandise influence the beliefs of millions, and evangelical pop culture is teeming with muscular heroes, mythical warriors, and rugged soldiers, men like John Wayne, Mel Gibson, Donald Trump, and the Duck Dynasty clan, who assert white masculine power in defense of Christian America. The values at the heart of white evangelicalism today, patriarchy, authoritarian rule, aggressive foreign policy, fear of Islam, ambivalence towards Me Too, and opposition to Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQ+ community, have transformed the faith with enduring consequences for all Americans. So quite a loaded book, really, but one that I think, when the time is right, will be a really, really interesting read. So, if you've read this, or if you know of anything similar, then let me know. I'd be really interested to give this a read. But moving on to more history of America, which actually seems to colour a lot of my kind of non-fiction choices, is Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. I also bought this in Powell's bookstore. It's a really battered, used copy, but I quite like that. I'm not really too precious when it comes to looking after books anymore, and I quite like when things are rugged and it means you can just kind of be a bit more at home with it. I absolutely loved The Wager by David Grann, which is a non-fiction story about this ship that goes missing in like the 1700s or something. And of course, this was adapted recently into an Apple TV Plus movie by Martin Scorsese, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. And it's a great movie. You should really watch it if you haven't. So it was only a matter of time before I would get round to reading this as well. I actually bought it as a present for my dad because he really enjoyed reading The Wager and he really liked the film. And, you know, as a family, we quite like history of America and we like stories about the development of the American West and stuff like that. So this is one that I think is actually quite high on my list to read next. David Grann does write with real pace and momentum, and it's a really, really interesting and sad, tragic story as well. And lastly on my list, moving away from America, finally, I recently picked up Starting Point by Hayao Miyazaki, which I've had on my reading list for a very, very long time, but it's not a book that is very easy to come by in the UK. And I just saw that someone was selling it on Vinted for a few quid, and I thought, I've just been to Japan, I need to read this. We're on a really, really big anime kick at the moment. I think this just might be a really nice book to read, especially when thinking about kind of being inspired with creativity and wanting to do some writing of my own and doing this YouTube channel. And we're sort of dipping our toes into things like anime and manga recently, and I just think this might be the right book at the right time. Really interested in like the history of Disney and Pixar and stuff like that. I actually have Walt Disney's like autobiography on my shelf as well that I still haven't read, but I think I will really, really enjoy this. And there's also Turning Point, which is like a sequel to the book as well. In the first 2 decades of his career, filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki laid the groundwork for his legendary movies. Starting Point is a collection of essays, interviews, and memoirs that go back to the roots of Miyazaki's childhood, the formulation of his theories of animation, and the founding of Studio Ghibli. Ghibli? Let me know in the comments. Before directing such acclaimed films as Spirited Away, Miyazaki was just another salaried animator but with a vision of his own. Follow him as he takes his first steps on the road to success, experience his frustrations with the manga and animation industries that often suffocate creativity, and realize the importance of bringing the childhood dreams of the world to life. Starting Point is not just a chronicle of the life of a man whose own dreams have come true, it is a tribute to the power of the moving image. Doesn't that just sound great? And that kind of is it, really. I kind of, want to keep the sort of videos going, and I was struggling to think about what to talk about this week, and I'm quite stretched for time this week as well, but I hope that was something that you enjoyed. If there's anything on that list that resonates with you, or if there's anything on that list that you have read that I haven't read yet, please let me know in the comments below if I should drop everything I'm doing to read that book and why, and let me know what's on your TBR as well, because I think it's just a really nice way to get book recommendations and figure out what people are reading and what's kind of in the sort of popular discourse about books. And it's much better than using things like Goodreads, which is kind of just really not very good for book recommendations at all. It's just nice to have a conversation, isn't it? So click like and subscribe if you enjoyed watching this video, and I'll probably see you next week. Thanks. Bye. Bye.